All right, so what's up, everybody? Thanks for clicking this video. Thanks for tuning into my channel. My name is Simon Hill, Black American from Louisiana, coming to you live from Budapest, Hungary. It's exactly 7 p.m. where I'm at. The date is July 20th, 2024, and today we are reading quite a few articles related to the rampant sexual abuse that seems to be happening at the hands of white men. I previously did this live stream last night on my cell phone, and the reason why I do a lot of live streams on my cell phone is because YouTube now has the find a channel or find new creators through the shorts feed. So when I'm going vertical on the phone, a lot of people discover my channel that way, and a lot of people subscribe that way. I get new viewers that way, more people tuning in that way, and that's a great way to grow the channel. But in the case of last night, I felt like this topic should have been handled more delicately, and it should have been the one, of course, out of all the ones that I do, where I frequently cite my sources. I should have cited my sources this time, and I should have put the links in the description. Nothing about what I said last night is different than what I'll say today, and I'm reacting to the same articles plus some new ones that I came across here in this live stream. So in this live stream, all the articles that I will be reading from you can find in the description of this video. Just open them up and click away, read them for yourself, come to your own conclusions. And on top of that, in this live stream, I will not be swearing. I will not be swearing. I will not be cursing. I will try to hold my tongue back as much as possible because, unfortunately, a lot of people don't like or they don't receive the views or information that comes from a black man whenever it is said in a frank and blunt way with swear words in them. I've had this critique of my channel since the very beginning. People can listen to white men rant and rave all day, but as soon as a black man raises his voice, it becomes an issue. So I'm going to be reading these articles about the rampant pedophilia, sexual abuse that happens to children at the hands of white men, giving my reaction to these articles and begging the question: why is it that a group of people who generally have the world at their feet, everything at their fingertips, by and large, they are undiscriminated against, they are generally the most sought after, desired, and powerful people on the planet, insistently, persistently abusing the most vulnerable among us in many societies, not only in their own societies and countries, but even flying across the world to deal harm to children? So we're going to start here with the Guardian article. This is an opinion piece written by this man that you see right here on the screen. It's titled, "It's Time to Face Up to the Problem of Sexual Abuse in the White Community," written by Joseph Harker. From Stuart Hall to North Wales, the issue won't go away. If you think I'm being ridiculous, read to the end of my argument. This was published on May 6, 2013 in the Guardian, like I said, and let's jump into it. Every day across Britain, it seems, there's a new and horrific revelation of sexual abuse. Last week, we had the guilty plea of veteran TV presenter Stuart Hall, who confessed to 14 cases of indecent assault against 13 girls, the youngest only 9 years old. Days earlier, the possible scale of child abuse in North Wales children's homes was revealed. We now know there were 140 allegations of historical abuse between 1963 and 1992. A total of 84 suspected offenders have been named, and it's claimed the abuse took place across 18 children's homes. Absolutely horrific, and a shame that that happened. And people like to say that the UK is diverse. There's a bunch of people from different countries there. The UK, by and large, is still mostly white, and the abusers in this case were white men. Continuing here. But after the shock has subsided and we have time to reflect on these revolting crimes, the main question in most reasonable people's minds must surely be, what is it about white people that makes them do this? Jimmy Savile is alleged to have abused 300 young people, and in his case and in North Wales, the abuse could not have happened without a wide range of co-conspirators, either grooming children or ensuring the truth never got out. Hardly a week goes by without another white man being arrested in connection with sexual abuse. I'm beginning to feel sorry for whites. I have many white friends, and I know most of them are wholly opposed to sexual abuse, but they must be worried that their whole community is getting a bad name. I can imagine that every day with each unfolding case, they must be hiding their face behind their hands, pleading, "Please, God, don't let it be a white person this time." Unfortunately, because of the rampant white supremacy around the world that blanketly protects most white people, they are not stereotyped for their crimes. This group of people, white men in particular, are not seen as the ones who are most likely to touch kids. They're not seen as the ones who are the most likely to prey upon the most vulnerable in our society. And that's because white men, by and large, get a blank slate, clean sheet of paper. People look at them and say, oh, he must be a good guy, or feel absolutely neutral about them. Meanwhile, for non-whites across the world, we exist with stereotypes that are foisted upon us by the dominant society, mostly in the negative. Continuing here. And with so many senior community figures implicated, many of us are starting to wonder what will happen to the next generation of whites. How will today's young whites learn that abuse is wrong when their role models are so tarnished? First, though, we need to find out what's causing the problem. Is it something to do with white people's culture? Is it something to do with impose their last vestiges of power on the most vulnerable in society? I put up a poll on my community tab last night, and I want to see what the results say. Last night, I put up a community tab poll that said, why do you think the vast majority of pedophiles are white men? And the options were, it's because of the waning influence of white supremacy. It's old cultural practice for them going back to ancient Greece. Amongst them, they honestly don't find it problematic. The devil will do what the devil does, shoulder shrug. Falling birth rates got them tripping. The vast majority, 71% out of 7 votes, said the devil will do what the devil does. And I'm convinced that those people agree with me that the white man mostly has devilish nature. And because they possess a devilish nature because of the history of violence and colonialism that they inflicted across the world, they find no problem in this. So my answer to the poll is that amongst them, they honestly don't find it problematic because a lot of them, their ancestors participated in this sort of behavior when they went to the New World or went to Asia to colonize and Africa to colonize as well. And because of their devilish nature that exists within them, they don't find this problematic. And of course, they will continue to perpetuate this, but it needs to be checked. They need to have a cultural reawakening where they realize that children need to be protected and not fondled. Continuing here. Or is it that having spent so much of their history waging wars against each other, they cannot cope with the relative peace of the last half century, and their frustration at not fighting is taken out on the weakest? I may have no evidence for this, but that's not going to stop me putting it out there as a cause. Or maybe it's their religion. Child abuse in the priesthood has, of course, also been tolerated for decades, allowing to continue unpunished through a conspiracy of silence among the church hierarchy. And despite the recent falls in attendance, Christianity still dominates European culture. And the Bible, which many whites still look to, has such verses as, do not withhold discipline from a child. If you strike him with a rod, he will not die. If you strike him with the rod, you will save his soul from Sheol, hell. Proverbs 23:13 and 14. It hardly fits with white society's claims to care for children. Once again, the hypocrisy in religion is insane. And I said this last night. I think a lot of the white supremacists who prey upon children see that verse about don't spoil the rod, spoil the child, or whatever it says in the Bible, as you see right here. You can read it directly or pick up the Bible yourself. They see the rod as their pink, purple tipped member that they want to insert, unfortunately, into the vulnerable and weak. Continuing here. It hardly fits with white society's claims to care for children. And even those who don't believe, such as Richard Dawkins, a senior cleric in the atheist community, have sought to downplay the gravity of child abuse, believing it's no worse than religion itself. As he wrote, horrible as sexual abuse no doubt was, the damage was arguably less than the long-term psychological damage inflicted by bringing the child up Catholic in the first place. It was hard for me to even finish that quote because of how disgusting that was. Richard Dawkins, a man who wrote The God Delusion, a man who goes on YouTube and on TV every single day to rail against religion about how people who believe in God are stupid, was saying that it was worse for a child to be Catholic, to believe in God, than to be sexually abused. That's absolutely insane. And that goes to show that this problem that exists in the white male community, which seems to be almost universal, which seems to exist in America, in Europe, and other places where these white men seem to congregate or exist and live, it seems to be pervasive amongst them. Atheists and unfortunately, Catholic priests seem to think, yes, this is something that we can do and get away with as long as we hide it in the shadows. And it's not that bad. Absolutely insane. Continuing here. Of course, what we really need now is for brave white community leaders to come out and distance themselves from the abusers. I agree with that. Maybe, say, the new head of the Equality and Human Rights Commission should come out and admit the issue is racial and cultural, and that she fears that in those communities there were people who knew what was going on and didn't say anything, either because they're frightened or they're so separated from the rest of the communities. Or a white cabinet member could say there is a small minority of white men who believe that young children are fair game, and we have to be prepared to say that. You can only start solving a problem if you acknowledge it first. Or the head of a leading children's charity could say, there is very troubling evidence that whites are overwhelmingly represented in the prosecutions for such offenses. Yet none of this has happened. And this saddens me because until we hear those brave voices speaking out against abuse, what are we meant to think? I urge white people to break this conspiracy of silence. Call on your leaders to show leadership, to show us all that you're not like the people who dominate the news headlines, that you really do care about protecting children. We should protect children. The whites need to have a cultural awakening where they stop preying upon children, and everybody, nobody should be touching kids. Period. Find women of your own age. Find men of your own age. Don't prey upon children. You may think all of the above is ridiculous, and that I'm stirring ethnic tensions on an issue that is clearly about individuals and small groups of people and has nothing to do with race or religion, and that by making this spurious case, I'm ignoring the core issue, which is that children, many of them in vulnerable situations, were terrorized and physically harmed by opportunistic men who were able to get away with their crimes for years. You'd be right. But all of the above arguments were made within various parts of our print and broadcast media when similarly small numbers of Muslim men were revealed to be grooming young girls for sex. If you think the claims about white people are wrong, then so is the stereotyping of Britain's Muslims and the widespread questioning of their culture and their religion because of the perverted actions of a few. Since the quote-unquote black crime shock tabloid stories of the 1980s, editors have known that stoking fears about misunderstood minorities is good for sales. If you object to this article, then you should understand how it feels to be a Muslim reading similar pieces pandering to Islamophobia day after day, and you should object to those too. I think this is a beautifully well-written article. Shout out to this man, Joseph Harker, for taking the time to actually pen this together and put up this counter argument to the narrative that the white supremacist dominant society says about black people and other minorities, that you guys are more criminal, you guys are more violent, you're sexually deviant. Meanwhile, in the white community, there is never that same sort of blanket statement put against their members. White men, by and large, young and old, are trafficking and abusing children, unfortunately, and it needs to be talked about. So that's that article. And he was talking about in the UK's context, how in the UK there was a stereotype that young Asian, Southeast Asian Muslim men were grooming children. I want to go to this article here. Most child sex groomers are white, says the government report. This is from 5pillarUK.com, published on December 16th, 2020. I'm going to close this link right here, go to this next article and react to it as well. A Home Office report has dealt a huge blow to the right-wing narrative of Asian grooming gangs by confirming that most child sex offenders are white, and there is no reliable evidence to confirm that Asians are overrepresented. The government initially refused to release the report because they said it was not in the public interest, but they relented after a public petition forced their hand. High-profile cases, including in Rotherham, Rochdale, and Telford, have involved groups of men of mainly Pakistani ethnicity, fueling a perception that it is an Asian problem. As a result, Asian grooming gangs have become a cause célèbre for the far right, with a number of high-profile figures mounting campaigns across the country. But the government report released yesterday says that CSC offenders are most commonly white. Some studies suggest an overrepresentation of black and Asian offenders relative to the demographics of national populations. However, it is not possible to conclude that this is representative of all group-based CSE offending due to issues such as data quality problems, the way the samples were selected in studies, and the potential for bias and inaccuracies in the way that ethnicity data is collected. The characteristics of offenders in group-based CSE include that they are predominantly, but not exclusively, male and are often older than sexual offenders in street gangs, but younger than lone child sexual offenders. In many cases, offenders are under the age of 30, but in some cases, they are much older. A number of high-profile cases, including the offending in Rotterdam and convictions in Telford, have mainly involved men of Pakistani ethnicity. Beyond specific high-profile cases, the academic literature highlights significant limitations to what can be said about links between ethnicity and this form of offending. Police forces have found that offender groups come from diverse backgrounds, with each group being broadly ethnically homogenous. However, there are cases where offenders within groups come from different backgrounds. Commenting on the report, Home Secretary Priti Patel said some studies have indicated an overrepresentation of Asian and Black offenders. However, it is difficult to draw conclusions about the ethnicity of offenders as existing research is limited and data collection is poor. This is disappointing because community and cultural factors are clearly relevant to understanding and tackling offending. Therefore, a commitment to improve the collection and analysis of data on group-based child sexual exploitation, including in relation to characteristics of offenders such as ethnicity and other factors, will be included in the forthcoming Tackling Child Sexual Abuse strategy. Quillen report debunked. The Home Office report appears to debunk a 2017 report by the Quillen Foundation, which found an alarming level of overrepresentation of South Asian men in grooming gangs. The Quillen report found that 84% of grooming gang offenders were South Asian, while they only make up 7% of the total UK population, and that the majority of these offenders are of Pakistani origin with Muslim heritage. At the time, author Muna Adil said, "There are elements from within the British Pakistani community that still subscribe to outdated and sexist views of women embedded within their jaded interpretations of Islam. These backward views are passed down from generation to generation until the lines between faith and culture dissolve, making it increasingly difficult to criticize one without being seen as a critic of the other." But following the Home Office report, one of the UK's leading experts on child sex offending, Dr. Ella Cockbain, took to Twitter to denounce Quillen, as did others. And Dr. Ella Cockbain said this: "Quillen's grooming gangs report dismissed as unreliable in today's Home Office review on child sexual exploitation. Shame, its dodgy statistics were so widely reported. Misinformation damages responses to child abuse." This is the thing. She is absolutely right. Absolutely right. Because when we misidentify the people that are most likely to do this crime, we are putting more children at risk. Continuing here. Mikdad Versi, those whose research was debunked at the time by experts such as Dr. LSC, yet stood by its veracity, need to respond now. The Quillen report was cited by national newspapers as fact and used by the far right. Absolutely a shame that so many people run with right-wing talking points, but let's clear up the misconceptions right now. The majority of the abusers out there are white men, and they get away with it a lot of the times because they're not suspected. They hide under the cover of what is appear to be innocence because of how they look, and this needs to be stopped. Now, we're going to go here to Australia. 1 in 10 Australian men reports having sexual interactions with under 18s, study finds. And I pulled this up right here, the demographics of Australia, because some people are going to say Australia is a nationality, not an ethnicity or race. The vast majority of Australians are European. And if we're looking at a pattern here, we're seeing that a lot of the European descended people across the world who happen to be men have some sort of predilection or predisposition to be caught up into being attracted to young children. And we're going to talk more about this, about young white men flying to Nepal, trying to abuse kids, flying to Thailand, abusing children as well. This is rampant. It needs to be stamped out. It needs to be spoken out against. And we need to actually say something about it. Continuing here. 1 in 10 Australian men report having sexual interactions with under 18s, study finds. UNSW study finds nearly 1 in 6 men over the age of 18 has sexual feelings towards under 18s. This was published on November 19th, 2023. Francine Rio's stepdad told her it was therapy. In 1976, the Newcastle Supreme Court found it was child sexual abuse. At that time, charging someone for incest was so unusual. They didn't even know how to word the charges, she said. Rio's stepdad spent 5 years behind bars for his years of severe offending, which took place for 10 years when she was age 6 to 16. She didn't speak about it for decades. I felt that if I'd gone public in those days, that I would have been seen as a nutcase, Rio said. People were so unable to discuss their own sexuality, let alone confront little children being sexually abused. At the time, pedophilia was believed to be rare, but according to the University of New South Wales research published on Monday, there is nothing rare about the sexual abuse of children. Described by its authors as the largest study of its kind ever undertaken globally, the study, titled Identifying and Understanding Child Sexual Offending Behavior and Attitudes Among Australian Men, surveyed a nationally representative sample of 1,945 Australian men and found that 9.4 endorsed at least one of five behaviors that the report authors characterized as sexual offending. That would equate to about 1 million Australian men. The figure includes online behavior, such as those who reported having had online sexual conversations with children, 4.3%, or deliberately watched pornographic material containing people below the age of 18, 2.5%. This is sick. It's sick. I might throw up just reading this. The study found 3.2% of men said they had had sex or sexual contact with a person below the age of 18 when they were over 18. The age of consent in Australia is 16 or 17, depending on the state, but the researchers used 18 as their benchmark for offending to align with studies measuring similar behavior in other countries. While acknowledging this as a limitation of the research, the authors argued it did not materially affect the findings. They said the rates of offending was consistent with other studies worldwide. I have to say this. Some people are going to say, well, if you're 18 years old and your girlfriend is 16, right, that might be, on the borderline. But they have some places, some countries. I don't know if Australia has this. I'm going to read the article and find out. They might have Romeo and Juliet laws where there is some exception based upon the age difference between the people. So if you're close in proximity to age, you're 19 and your girlfriend is, I don't know, 16, 17 or something like that. They might say, okay, we understand y'all are teenagers, y'all are kids, y'all probably still are in high school together. So maybe that's why y'all had this sexual relationship, right? But I would argue this. If somebody is 18, 19, and they find a way to get away with that, that can create a pattern of behavior within them that makes them think, okay, I can get away with this later. So they're 19 having sex with their 16-year-old girlfriend. They might become 25 and try to say, well, I can just get another 16-year-old girlfriend, 15-year-old girlfriend. And if I find a way to get away with it, I can continue on in this pattern of behavior. And that's why I think, like, even if you're in that age range bracket, like, we should still frown upon this practice, and there should be some criminal punishments for those people that do this. Continuing here. People really need to ask themselves, we've got so many victims in the community, we've got so many lives that are impacted by child sexual abuse, but we have comparatively few men in prison for this offense. So who's responsible for all of this damage? Asked Michael Salter, an associate professor in criminology at UNSW, who helped develop the study. And that's what our survey is highlighting. The report found nearly 1 in 6 men, 15.1%, had sexual feelings towards under 18s. Ugh. All right. It reported that child offenders are also prolific consumers of deviant or violent adult pornography, signaling to Salter that the overall porn-saturated online environment does have a role to play in sexual harm to children. Unfortunately, the Commonwealth government has kicked the can down the road when it comes to age verification for adult content, and I think our survey signals the need to revisit that decision. The findings add to groundbreaking research into victims of child abuse published in April. The landmark Australian child maltreatment study found that about 23.7% of Australians had experienced child sexual abuse. That's a very large amount. That's close to a quarter of Australians had been sexually abused. And Australia, once again, for anybody who doubts it, is largely white. Largely white. Largely white. And if we go back in time, if those people are, 30, 40 years old, Australia was even more white a few decades ago. So Oh, wow. About 8.7 have been forced into sex. More than 1 in 3 Australian girls experience child sexual abuse, it found. The UNSW research found two distinct cohorts of child sex offenders, one which is motivated by sexual interest in children, and a second group who may be offending for situational or opportunistic reasons. It also revealed the existence of a large group of undetected men who Salter called specialist offenders, otherwise pro social, well liked, high status men who repeatedly groom and then abuse children without detection. The study showed they tend to have higher incomes and are more likely to be married and are more likely to work in a field, giving them access to kids. He said governments and social media providers need to do more to uncover their offending. I work with kids. I post my pictures on my community tab of me teaching my kids, students, and stuff like that. I can't imagine how somebody can look at those very small people and say, yeah, they're attractive to me. I don't understand that. I come from a different world. I come from the world of Pimp C. A pimp said a bald head coochie ain't ish. Put some put some hairs on it. That razor bumps ain't it. Something like that, right? Like we like thick, voluptuous, full-grown women, preferably MILFs. I love my curvaceous wife. I cannot imagine somebody looking at children and saying that those people are attractive and they need to be used in that way. That's absolutely insane. But this is a prevalent thing that happens amongst white men, whether they be in Australia, America, Europe, whatever. I'm trying to understand why. I'm trying to understand why. We have commercial products that are actively facilitating child sexual exploitation, said the man earlier. The study also found that perpetrators were also more likely to have been themselves the victim of sexual abuse or had adverse experiences as a child, to have anxiety, depression, and binge drinking. Stop It Now Australia, the country's only helpline for people sexually attracted to children, helped develop the study. It found that about 1/3 of men with sexual feelings toward children wanted help. So, Georgia Naldrit, clinical manager at the helpline, called for governments to invest in initiatives that address boys and men who report troubling thoughts and behaviors. I think this also needs to be talked about amongst white women as well. I don't know if Australia has this issue, but in America, we constantly hear stories of young white female teachers hopping on middle school boys, high school boys, and that sort of stuff. And unfortunately, because we live in a society with double standards when it comes to sexuality for men and women, a lot of the times men hear those stories and say, yeah, go bro, yeah, salute to you, and all that sort of stuff, and they don't take it seriously. And these teachers get low jail sentences or just probation or no punishment at all, and it needs to be fixed and addressed. Continuing here. Now 77, Rio spent years fighting for compensation even after proving the offending took place. She said the offending had lifelong deleterious effects on her, but urged victims to seek therapeutic support and guidance. You can get through it and you can live a normal life. You can get it into perspective to the point where you don't relive it and you're not having nightmares anymore, she said. So the headline and text of this article were amended on the 20th and 21st of November 2023. An earlier version said that 9.4% of Australian men have reported having offended against a child. This should have referred instead to sexual interactions to reflect the fact that not all sexual contact involving under 18s in Australia is a criminal offense. Wow, that's even more disturbing. That's even more disturbing. Now, continuing on with Australia here. We talked about their demographics, and trust me, we're going to get to the Catholic Church soon. But let's continue talking about the issue in Australia. Two FBI agents uncovered a pedophile ring leading to their murders, then a Perth arrest. Very, very crazy story that we're going to be reading here and analyzing and breaking down, but goes to show that, these people stop at no lengths to get what they want to have, which unfortunately a lot of the times are the most vulnerable in our society. Let's go here. This was written by Rebecca Pepiet for WA Today. Once again, the links are in the description. Shout out to my guy Ozzy, who asked for the links for all of these articles. Well, now y'all have them. Perth man Stephen Paul Asher was jailed this week after an investigation that had its origins in the murders of two FBI agents. The 64-year-old father is also a tech genius and cybersecurity expert who formerly worked for Goldman Sachs before co-launching a cyber software company now worth $20 million. So here's Stephen Asher right here. let's make this absolutely clear. It's not an Indian man. That's not a black man. That's not an Arab man. We know who he is. Stephen Asher, 64, was jailed for 18 months on Thursday for his part in an international pedophile ring. Asher had the technical ability to fly under the radar as he scanned the dark web for images of naked pubescent and prepubescent girls, some under 13 years old. But after automatic gunfire killed FBI Special Agents Daniel Alfin and Laura Schwarzenberger as they stood on the doorstep of a Florida apartment in February 2021, further investigations revealed their killer was part of a child abuse network that stretched as far back as Australia. Wow. They knocked on the door of reclusive IT worker, 55-year-old David Lee Huber, to execute a search warrant for child abuse material. It's believed Huber saw the agents through his doorbell camera and fired his assault rifle through the door. Alfin and Schwarzenberger died, and 3 more agents were wounded. Huber then turned the gun on himself. But the officers' work continued after their deaths, and a year later, the FBI discovered Huber was part of a child abuse network that stretched as far back as Australia. After the tip-off, a joint police investigation was launched by the AFP and state police, leading to the arrest of 19 men and the removal of 13 children from harm. Police said those involved developed a sophisticated online child abuse network and that some of the offenders produced their own material to share with other members. They added that they were all likely employed in occupations that required a high degree of tech knowledge. A shame, a shame. It's a shame these people lost their lives. You get what I'm saying? These people just doing their jobs, working class people trying to protect kids, working for the FBI, trying to stop people that were spreading that hateful, sick, degenerate material online, and still they lost their lives to these sick pedophiles stretching from America to Australia. The unifying culture, a unifying culture amongst white men. Continuing here. Asher was one of those men, the only one from Washington. And when police raided his Perth home last year, they found 3 laptops and another device containing hundreds of photos of videos of girls. They were in states of undress. Perth District Court heard on Thursday, and the images were focused on genitals and breasts. The court heard Asher confessed to searching for and downloading the images. He gave them passwords to the laptops. He told police he had a sexual attraction to teenagers. Federal prosecutor Isabel Seville told the court. While being sentenced for 3 counts of having child abuse material, he had access using a carriage system and 1 count of using a carriage service to access child pornography material. The court heard Asher was a quote-unquote gifted child who excelled in English and maths at school before going on to university. He's just a bright, gifted loner, a nerd who was ill-adjusted. Please go light on him, judge. No, throw the book at him, bury him under the jail. Execution style. Give it to him. Continuing here. So his career as an IT whiz soared, but after losing both of his adopted parents as a child, his mental health declined and he was prone to bouts of depression. It was in those times that he sought solace in child porn. What? The court heard. I can't even read that with a straight face. I'm very upset that in the media, oftentimes, when the perpetrators of heinous, vicious, horrific crimes are white males, they have to pad them up and give a sob story to the audience. His adopted parents died, his mental health declined, he had depression, binge drinking. So the way he coped with all of that was not working out, was not trying to better himself. It was not writing books. It was not, running in marathons. It was not lifting weights. It was not getting a girlfriend. It was not excelling at his work. It was CP. What? I hate the media, how oftentimes they try to cover for white males like this. Whether the white male be a shooter, a school shooter who walks in there and clears out his whole 9th grade classroom, whether it be a domestic terrorist like Timothy McVeigh blowing up federal buildings, they always try to give this padding, this sob story to these people. I'm sick of that. I'm really sick of that. You told police that you identify as a hebephile, Judge Belinda Lonsdale said. You told police you had been accessing child exploitation material for some time. The court heard Asher had few friends, struggling with impulsiveness due to ADHD, and displayed symptoms of autism spectrum disorder. Since he had been arrested and charged, the court heard Asher had been forced to walk away from the 30% share he had in a successful cybersecurity company because he would have breached its ability to continue its national security work. He'd also been evicted from his rental home and abandoned by his 31-year-old son. But the judge said with a maximum penalty of 15 years for each of the charges he was facing. She needed to deter others from engaging in similar activities. The children are real children. They are not electronic depictions or avatars. Wow. Wow, wow, wow. All right. So the making of child exploitation material is so widespread, the courts must do their part in this. Asher was given a total sentence of 18 months after the judge reasoned his offending could have involved younger children in far more compromising images. She added that Asher was a first-time offender who had no prior criminal history. He could be released after 9 months spent in jail on a conditions-based reconnaissance order. Wow. Wow, that's crazy. That's crazy that they're going this lenient on this guy who was trafficking in this material and also a part of, an organization that had murderous homicidal effects in a whole other country. Absolutely insane that he could actually get that few amount of time in jail. That small amount of time in jail. 9 months in jail on conditions based reconnaissance order. That's crazy. That's absolutely crazy. 15 years. Throw the book at them. Why are they going so soft on them? If had this been a Muslim man, had this been a black man, had this been an Aboriginal man in Australia, he'd still be in jail. He'd be in jail until infinity, till kingdom come. Crazy. So AFP commander Helen Schneider said no matter how sophisticated the setup, police would track down child exploitation offenders. Viewing, distributing, or producing child abuse material is a horrific crime, and the lengths that these alleged offenders went to in order to avoid detection makes them especially dangerous. The longer they avoid detection, the longer they can perpetuate the cycle of abuse, she said. The success of Operation Bakis demonstrates the importance of partnership for law enforcement at a national level here in Australia, but also at an international level. Crazy that these stories are happening. Once again, these men need to be stopped. They need to be called out. The culture amongst white men that seems to be preying upon young children needs to be talked about. We need to have a serious discussion about the cultural issues amongst white men and their desire to somehow prey upon people that are weaker than them. It goes back to the colonial days when they sailed across the world and destroyed and ravaged civilizations and also hopped on children during those times as well. Well documented proof. Thomas Jefferson, U.S. president, founding father, and that sort of stuff. He was violating Sally Hemings, who was 14 years old, his slave girl, that sort of stuff. This stuff needs to be discussed and talked about. Now, finally, to the Catholic Church, because earlier, Richard Dawkins, famous atheist, said it was worse to be a Catholic. It was a worse thing to be raised as Catholic than to be abused. But let's talk about actual abuse in the Catholic Church. So the Catholic Church's grim history of ignoring priestly pedophilia and silencing would-be whistleblowers. This was published in The Conversation on October 9th, 2018. Now, let's go to the demographics of Catholic priests. Now, this is for this year, now in 2024. Catholic priests are, of course, 97% male. I don't think, the real Roman Catholic Church allows females to become priests, but there are a small amount. Maybe it's a Reformed Catholic Church, an unorthodox Catholic Church. The vast majority of Catholic priests are white. They are white. 67% are white. Now, some of them could be Latino because there are white Latinos as well. But this is for the Americas. This is in the U.S. and white is going to be white just for the sake of it. If Latinos want to be white so bad, they got to hold the W's and also hold the L's as well. And plus, if we take this back in time, because the abuse in the Catholic Church didn't just start in this century, it's been going on for centuries. Some would say even millennia, right? Because the Catholic Church does not allow their priests to get married and have normal heterosexual relationships. Even if they were married, it seems to still be something about, being around the altar boys and stuff like that, that seems to make these priests turn up. Because if I was a straight male, right, heterosexual male, that wouldn't matter if I was married or not. If the church didn't allow me to get married or not. If I really wanted to have sex, I would have sex with a woman who was of my age, preferably very thick. I would not prey upon children. I don't know what it is about being in the Catholic Church that causes that to happen. But by and large, most Catholic priests are white and male, right? It doesn't get more white than that. So let's read here. This is the article from The Conversation. So Widespread public shock followed the recent release of the Pennsylvania grand jury report that identified more than 1,000 child victims of clergy sexual abuse. In fact, as I know through my research, the Vatican and its American bishops have known about the problem of priestly pedophilia since at least the 1950s, and the church has consistently silenced would-be whistleblowers from within its own ranks. In the memory of many Americans, the only comparable scandal was in Massachusetts, where in 2002 the Boston Globe published more than 600 articles about abuses under the administration of Cardinal Bernard Law. That investigation was immortalized in the 2015 award-winning film Spotlight. What many Americans don't remember, however, are other similar scandals, some even more dramatic and national in scope. Doubling down on secrecy. While the problem of priestly pedophilia might be centuries old, the modern paper trail began only after World War II, when treatment centers appeared for rehabilitating abusive priests. Instead of increased transparency, bishops at the same time developed methods for denying and hiding allegations of child sexual abuse. So the Catholic Church was actually, hiding their priests and training them on how to talk about defending their crimes, defending the horrible things that they did to kids back in the day. Back during World War II, or around the time of World War II. During the 1950s and 1960s, bishops from around the U.S. began referring abusive priests to church-run medical centers so that they could receive evaluation and care without disclosing their crimes to independent clinicians. Friar Gerald Fitzgerald, who began his ministry in Boston and Quebec, was among those who advocated prayer over medicine. In 1947, Fitzgerald moved to New Mexico and founded the Servants of the Paraclete, a new order of Catholic priests devoted to healing deviant clergy. His belief in faith healing reflected a vocal minority of Catholic leaders who still viewed psychology as a threat to Christian faith. Fitzgerald based the Paracletes in New Mexico. From 1947 to 1995, the state became a dumping ground for pedophile priests. As Kathleen Hulsher, chair of Roman Catholic Studies at the University of New Mexico, has observed, this practice forced New Mexico's parishes to absorb, in effect, abusive priests from across the country. Absolutely insane. This is insane history right here. Other priests sent to the Paracletes were returned back into ministry in their home dioceses, reassigned to new parishes that had no way of knowing about their abusive past. This system was sustained in part by the fact that few diocesan personnel files recorded past accusations by children and parents. As Richard Sipe, a psychologist who worked at a similar Catholic treatment center, later revealed, bishops generally masked past accusations by instead recording code words like tickling, wrestling, or entangled friendship in personnel files. Wow. In 1957, Fitzgerald became convinced that pedophilia could not be treated, even as he continued to believe that prayers could cure other illnesses, such as alcoholism. He petitioned U.S. bishops to stop sending him their child abusers, advocating instead for firing abusive priests and permanently removing them from ministry. Fitzgerald eventually appealed directly to the Vatican and met with Pope Paul VI to discuss the problem in 1963. That's crazy. That's a crazy history. This is my first time reading this article, and I had no idea. Now, my mother is Catholic, and I went to Catholic church. I wouldn't say I was raised Catholic. Never was an altar boy. Had communion and all that. Did the kneeling and bowing, 1 hour mass, all that sort of stuff. But it's still crazy that I could have been in a Catholic church where Father, was preaching and stuff like that, and at the same time abusing some of those young boys who are up there. And that's crazy that this happened so much, that they actually sent their pedophilic priests to New Mexico to pray the stain away, pray the evil out of their hearts. But the guy who was running the program didn't even think that pedophilia could be cured. Crazy, crazy history. So, hush money. It is unclear when the church began using hush settlements to silence victims. The practice, however, was so widespread by the 1980s that the Vatican assigned church lawyers to adjust their insurance policies in order to minimize additional liabilities. These included Friar Thomas Doyle, a non-parish priest who specialized in Roman Catholicism's internal laws; Friar Michael Peterson, a trained psychiatrist who believed that priests with abusive disorders should be treated medically; and Roy Houghton, a civil attorney who represented one of the church's most notorious pedophile priests. Together, they authored a 92-page report and submitted it for presentation at the 1985 meeting of the National Conference of Catholic Bishops, the church's apparatus for controlling and governing American priests. The document estimated that American bishops should plan to be sued for at least $1 billion and up to $10 billion over the following decades. Several of the nation's most powerful cardinals buried the report. In response, Doyle mailed all 92 pages along with an executive summary to every diocese in the United States. Yet there is no evidence that any bishops heeded the report's warnings. Crazy. So they knew that this was so widespread. They were planning how much money they were going to have to settle because of how many people were abusing children and how rampant it was amongst their community of mostly white male priests. Let's once again, Catholic priest demographics and statistics in the U.S. Male 97% and white 67% as of 2024. Take this back a few decades, I'm pretty sure the white numbers will be up to like 80 or 90%, right? And I believe there was a time in the Catholic Church they wouldn't even allow black people or non-white people to be priests. Continuing here. 1992, the nation's first scandal. During the 1980s, victims began to speak out against the church's systemic attempts to mask the scope of the crisis. In 1984, survivors of Friar Gilbert Galfe refused to be silenced by hush money, instead choosing the painful path of initiating public lawsuits in Louisiana. Galfe ultimately confessed to abusing 37 children. Wow. Wow, wow, wow. Look at this, man. Look at this. Young people whose lives were destroyed. Some black, mostly white, young, by this guy right here. Absolutely insane. Absolutely insane. Insane. So, as these stories became public, more and more victims began to bring lawsuits against the church. In Chicago, the nation's first two clergy abuse survivor organizations, Victims of Clergy Sexual Abuse Link Up, and the Survivors Network for Those Abused by Priests, or SNAP, were created in 1987. In 1992, survivor Frank Fitzpatrick's public allegations led to revelations that Friar James Porter had abused more than 100 other children in Massachusetts. Widespread shock followed at the time as well as after Fitzpatrick's appearance on ABC's Primetime Live, when news anchor Diane Sawyer interviewed Fitzpatrick and 30 other Porter victims. The national outcry forced dioceses across the country to create public standards for how they were handling abuse accusations, and American bishops launched new marketing campaigns to regain trust. In spite of internal pledges to reform their culture of covering up abuses, the Pennsylvania grand jury report demonstrates the church's de facto policy remains unchanged since the 1950s. Instead of reporting rape and sexual abuse to secular authorities, bishops instead continue to transfer predatory priests from one unsuspecting parish to the next. Victims with no hope of justice. The issue of clergy sex abuse has also unleashed broader questions about justice and faith. Can courtrooms repair souls? How do survivors continue to pray and attend Mass? As a scholar who studies communities of clergy abuse victims, I have asked Catholics to share their thoughts about the current crises. Many of them tell me that at least Boston's Cardinal Law went to jail. That leads to an awkward moment when I have to refresh their memory. Cardinal Law was neither indicted nor arrested. So the guy who sort of kicked off, the Catholic priest pedophile scandals across America, the guy who was the most prevalent, most well-known, who blew the lid off the can, didn't even go to jail, was neither indicted nor arrested. Instead, Pope John Paul II transferred law to run one of the Vatican's most cherished properties, the Basilica of St. Mary, essentially rewarding law for his deft cover-up of the abuses in Boston. That's crazy. That's crazy. In fact, no American bishop or cardinals have ever been jailed for their role in covering up and enabling child sex abuse. Let's repeat. No American bishops or cardinals have ever been jailed for their role in covering up and enabling child sexual abuse. Civil settlements have held the church accountable only financially. A combination of political complacency and expired statutes of limitations has prevented most survivors from obtaining real justice. So I think that this does exist in the minds of people, right? That somebody, a priest who commits something so heinous, obviously went to jail, right? I think a lot of us hear these stories about another priest got caught touching on kids, another priest, was discovered for abusing kids for many years, and we say, oh yeah, that guy obviously went to jail. A lot of them don't. And the people that cover up the crimes of those priests actually do not go to jail. They don't go to jail. The Catholic Church, because they're the richest organization on the planet, just pays the families millions of dollars in settlements, and then the priest is reshuffled around or decommissioned or something like that. And once again, guys, Catholic priest demographics and statistics in the U.S., 97% male, 67.9% white. And I have yet to hear about a black priest. If anybody can find me the story of the black priest who's been accused of doing this, I would love to know. I would love to know. Once again, I am not saying that only white men are the people who abuse children, but they are the vast majority. And it seems to be a constant thing that seems to pervade in their societies all the time. Ozzy jumped into the chat. He said, hide your kids, hide your wife. Just hide your kids, hide your sons, hide your daughters. Ozzy, I'm doing this live stream again for you because last night you said you wanted the links to all of these articles. And this is one of the topics that if I was ever going to put links and sources, I should have done it for this one. And I'm glad I'm doing it now. And I'm doing it now in a calm, staid, relaxed manner. And I will not use any swearing at all. So YouTube has no reason to try to take this down. I'm just reading the facts and giving my reactions to these stories. Let's continue here. So, outraged by this lack of justice, survivors urged the International Criminal Court at The Hague to investigate the Vatican for crimes against humanity. The International Criminal Court declined, citing the fact that many of the alleged crimes occurred before the court was formed and were thus beyond the scope of the court's temporal jurisdiction. That doesn't make sense. That's absolutely insane. This makes me think that it is somewhat a cultural conspiracy amongst them to cover up the crimes of white men, particularly powerful white men, of abusing children. We don't even have to talk about Epstein. I'm no Epstein conspiracy theorist, but the information as it's continued to leak about Epstein and the crimes he committed and who he was connected to, and how there seems to be no justice for the people that were tied to Epstein, went to the island, flew on the private planes. It seems like from The Hague on down, that there is this sort of cover up conspiratorial culture amongst powerful white men to say, oh, abuse against children, let's just sweep that under the rug. Let's just pay the settlements and move on about our lives. Crazy. So, to date, the highest ranking priest tried in an American court is Philadelphia's Monsignor William Lynn, who was charged with conspiracy and 2 counts of endangering children. His 2012 conviction for 1 count of endangerment was vacated by the Pennsylvania Supreme Court in 2016. He now awaits an unscheduled retrial. I would like to know if he's in jail or if he's walking around free too. Once again, it's absolutely insane. It's absolutely insane that these powerful white men can get away with abusing children so much. And the church covers it up. And the church covers it up. Even as scholars and theologians have called for all the American bishops to resign, there has been little talk of criminal prosecutions. If yesterday's survivors do not find justice, tomorrow's children will not know safety. As the Pennsylvania grand jury emphasized, there have been other reports about child sexual abuse within the Catholic Church. For many of us, those earlier stories happened someplace else, someplace away. Now we know the truth. It happened everywhere. Absolutely insane that this is happening so much amongst children, and people are getting hurt. People are getting hurt by men that look like this, powerful men that look like this, that have the complexion for protection. Meanwhile, the victims are left on the floor. Even I find this problematic. Why do you have the victims? Why do you have the perpetrator of the crime's face held up above the table? Meanwhile, you have the children who were hurt by all of these things strewn across the floor as if their lives and the pain they went through doesn't matter. Absolutely a shame. It's a shame. But that's how we think about that's how white supremacy makes us think about white men. That's how white supremacy across the world allows protection for these powerful white men. Absolutely a shame that this happens. Now, let's continue here with this article, Southeast Asia, a haven for pedophiles, published on August 17th, 2006. Once again, I read this article last night, but I'm providing the links. Y'all can see the text. Y'all can see what I'm reading. Come to your own conclusions yourself. But in this article, it says, plain as day, the majority, in fact, in the entirety of the people who are flying to Nepal are rich white men seeking to abuse children. The arrest of 41-year-old John Carr on charges of first-degree murder, kidnapping, and child sexual assault in the 1996 murder of 6-year-old John Benet Ramsey has shined a harsh spotlight on the country where he apparently resided, Thailand, which has long seen as a destination country for pedophile sex tourists. Carr was already being held in Bangkok on unrelated sex charges. He apparently disappeared from the United States in 2001 after he was released from jail, where he'd been held on child pornography charges. Thailand has a reputation for engaging in one of the largest child sex trade operations in Southeast Asia. UNICEF estimates the number of Thai children involved in prostitution to be between 60,000 and 200,000, though the organization says the exact number is difficult to track. Now, it's absolutely astounding, staggering, the amount of children that are involved in this. 60,000 to 200,000. That's the size of a very large city. 60,000 people is more than my hometown of Monroe, Louisiana. That's an insane number of children. Now, the parents do have some responsibility to bear. In fact, it's a large amount of responsibility that the parents bear for even considering the idea of putting up your children. It doesn't matter how poor you are, how destitute you are, what situation you're in, your children should be your number one priority, and they should be protected from all sorts of abuse. It does not make there is no excuse, honestly, for putting your children up to that. But we know we live in a capitalistic world of capitalist exploitation. And if there is a demand for a product, some people will succumb to the temptation to gain money by any means necessary. And because of the system of white supremacy that we live in, where all the wealth is stratified towards the top countries in the world that predominantly are in the West, Europe, the Americas, etc., the vast majority of people who hold wealth are white men, and they exercise their privilege and power that wealth provides them by going to these nations where people don't have two pennies to rub together, and then they abuse these children. It's absolutely a shame. So the U.S. Department of Justice said the growing popularity of the very profitable child sex tourism trade contributes to the problem. A Thai organization called FACE, the Coalition to Fight Against Child Exploitation, claimed that 5,000 foreigners come to Thailand each year to have sex with children. 5,000 foreigners. That's a staggering amount of people specifically coming to target children. The organization described the average sex tourist as a middle-aged white male from either Europe or North America who often goes online to find the quote-unquote best deals. Let's repeat. The organization described the average sex tourist as a middle-aged white male from either Europe or North America who often goes online to find the best deals. One particular website promised nights of sex with 2 young Thai girls for the price of a tank of gas. Sickening. Soumya Nair, a Department of Justice agent, said the Thai government often turns a blind eye to child sex tourism because of the country's economic reliance on the tourist trade in general. He also said police officers are often corrupt. Police have been known to guard brothels and even procure children for prostitution, Nair said. Some police directly exploit the children themselves. Now, any adult involved in covering up this, contributing to the economy of this, or the perpetuation of this, in my opinion, deserves the worst sentence possible. And I am against the death penalty, except in this case. I am against the death penalty or capital punishment, except in this case. Because how can you, as a police officer, a grown man, see a 10-year-old, 11-year-old, 12-year-old child go into a room with a grown man and you turn the blind eye? You look the other way. A report from the International Bureau for Children's Rights said the majority of child prostitutes come from poor families in northern Thailand, referred to as the quote-unquote hill tribes. With limited economic opportunities and bleak financial circumstances, these families, out of desperation, give their children to quote-unquote recruiters who promise them jobs in the city and then force the children into prostitution. Sometimes families themselves even prostitute their children or sell them into the sex trade for a minuscule sum of money. Absolutely insane. Absolutely insane. And this needs to be ramped out. I said this last night, but the only way these Asian countries can protect their children is if they put a 5-year ban on any white man entering their country. Because how are you going to know? Are you here for business or pleasure? As they say to the Border Patrol agent, I'm here for pleasure. You don't know exactly what type of pleasure this white man is talking about. There needs to be a moratorium. They need to build the wall. They need to protect their kids from the people that are most likely to harass them. Now, Let's jump here to Nepal. I mentioned Nepal for that article about Thailand. I was wrong. I meant to jump to this one. Continuing here. Why are Western pedophiles targeting Nepal? Many rich Westerners are targeting Nepal to exploit and sexually abuse children, owing to weak government oversight. This was written by Aran Budhatoki, published 6 years ago for TRT World. And this is still, unfortunately, continuing. Poverty often makes a country vulnerable to the world's ills, and pedophilia is manifesting in Nepal's post-2015 earthquake, targeting poverty-stricken families. The number of alleged pedophiles arrested in Nepal in a year has skyrocketed. Although altogether 10 foreign nationals have been arrested from 2016 to 2018. The startling revelation here is that all of them are privileged white men. Let's repeat. Altogether, 10 foreign nationals have been arrested from 2016 to 2018. The startling revelation here is that all of them are privileged white men. The question arises, why are pedophiles targeting underage Nepalese boys? I read the chat last time. I know I didn't respond to all the comments or questions. And while I was reading the stories about Thailand and Nepal, there was a how can I say this, a Clayton Bigsby, who jumped into the comments, presumably a black man, who said that he went to Cambodia and he saw black men out there that were also chasing after young children for this type of abuse. Number one, I've been to a lot of places and I haven't seen black men by and large traveling to places to do that sort of activity. The passport bros are real. The passport bros are out there. But every time we turn on and see the Austin Holomans of the world, they're chasing after big, thick Latina MILFs. That's all they're doing. I have yet to see that. So if we're going to base this on anecdote for anecdote, you're wrong and I'm right. I've documented my travel experiences. You're a nobody online. And if anybody, and I put this up, I swear to God, if anybody can find me 10 black men, 10 black men that have been arrested in Thailand or Nepal or any of the Asian countries, and they are still there in jail for actually abusing children, 10 black men, find me 10 black men who have gone to these Asian countries to abuse children, I will delete my entire channel or I will never post again. I promise you, I swear to God, wallahi, 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 find me 10 black men that have been accused and convicted of the same crimes these rich, privileged white men have been doing, and I will delete my entire channel or never post again. Find me that information. Because people love to come into the comments and say it's not about race, it's not a cultural thing, it's not just white men. Find me the black men that are doing this. Find me the black men that are going to Cambodia, Nepal, Thailand, Sri Lanka to chase after children. Anecdote for anecdote. I've been traveling. I haven't seen it. You're just some guy typing online who hasn't done anything to document his experiences about what it's like to be black abroad. Continuing here. Nepal is a tourist-friendly nation, and citizens of most developed countries need not worry about entering the Himalayan nation due to its relaxed visa system. The culture per se views foreigners, particularly the Western white-skinned, as the quote-unquote good people and godlike. This once again goes to show how white supremacy affects the minds of people. They view whiteness as superior, as beautiful, as much desired. And once again, it doesn't make sense why white men have all of this at their fingertips, yet and still they choose to do evil. They choose to do evil, which is abusing children. This worldview of most Nepalese has put them in a continuous schism with outsiders. The victims are mostly the children of poor parents who are easily lured by pedophiles. They are offered clothes, toys, and gifts and get abused in the process. But is it the fault of the locals? A country so dependent on tourism easily falls prey to others, but there are other factors contributing to it. Nepal's weak law enforcement is another shortcoming that pedophiles exploit. The immigration department at the country's only international airport does not possess any biometric technology to catch individuals with a history of sexual assaults against children. One such case was revealed recently when the French duo Christophe Guyot and Denis Mathieu Michel Chapois were arrested on July 24th from Manhara, Kathmandu. The latter individual was arrested in 2004 for sexual assault on minors and possessing images of child abuse in France and served a jail term. The immigration department, hence, came under scrutiny after this revelation. The lack of biometric technology and a robust database to check foreigners with criminal records has contributed to this. Since most foreigners do not have to produce police clearance while entering the country, it's easier for individuals with a history of crimes against children to bypass the immigration gate easily. If they're going to stereotype and typecast young black men, young Muslim men, young Asian men, and that sort of stuff, Nepal and other countries, as white men are entering, need to stereotype, typecast them, whatever. Biometric data for them. Step to the side, Conrad. Step to the side, Adam. We need to pat you down and we need to do some serious questioning for you as to why you're entering our country. How many times have you touched kids? You have to ask them that. You have to ask them that to verify. To verify. Not do you, not have you. How many times? Continuing here. It is only when the Central Investigation Bureau, or CIB, and the Nepali police are tipped off by their own agents or activist groups that the arrests happen. This also shows that the enforcement agencies in Nepal are one step behind the perpetrators. Although the Nepali government announced that it would start monitoring foreigners who enter the country, its effect is yet to be seen. The other reason for Nepal becoming a fertile soil to the pedophiles is a weak law against pedophilia. Nepal's new updated criminal code also doesn't have the word pedophilia, but treats the cases as sex exploitation against children. If convicted, a pedophile faces a jail term of 11 years and must pay a compensation fee to the other victims. Nepal abolished capital punishment in 1990, and experts argue that it's one of the reasons why criminals target Nepal, knowing that there will be a lesser prison term. They know that they won't be executed. They know they only face 11 years in jail, and they can maybe just pay some money to the victims and get out of it. That's crazy. Nepal needs to tighten up. Tighten up. Protect your kids. Protect your kids. This was evident in the recent deportation of 75-year-old Canadian pedophile Fenwick McIntosh from Nakhu Prison, Lalatpur. He was serving a 7-year jail term since March 2015 after his arrest in December 2014 for sexually molesting a 15-year-old boy. The police let him leave the country, citing his age and deteriorating health. No, they should have held him until he croaked. So, an official from the immigration department confirmed the event and, and said that McIntosh will likely not face any legal action against him. Also, there are other individuals who are behind bars awaiting final judgment. Among them are German national Albert Fred Killinch, arrested on June 29, 2017, white male, in Thamel. U.S. national Kenneth Joseph Combs, white male, arrested on September 9, 2016, in Thamel. Austrian Kendler Marcus, arrested on September 6, 2017, in Thamel. Canadian Peter Dalgleish, arrested on April 8th in Nagarkot. German Hans-Jürgen Gustav Dahm, aka Jogan, arrested on January 13th, 2018. Dutch Piet Hein van Terswege, arrested on June 14th in Thamel. Dutch Henricus Andrinus Joseph Kruschan, arrested on November 10th, 2017 in Kodeshwar. And Swiss Peter Christian Lagendorf, arrested on July 20th. Now, I can't pronounce these horrible, crazy-sounding European names, but you know what I can say? All of these are white males. All of these are white males. All these individuals came to Nepal on tourist visas using the veil of humanitarian work and volunteerism. Volunteering is another factor that pedophiles have used to target their prey, since Nepal is dependent on foreign donors and it's easier for individuals to hoodwink others. It is not just foreigners, even Nepalis have been found working for them. Buddha Patwar, aka Luce, was found supplying underage boys to U.S. citizen Kenneth Joseph Coombs in 2016. Absolutely ashamed that anybody would even collaborate in committing this crime with these Western foreigners who are abusing your children and then look down on you as a people. Coombs and Putawar were arrested in September of the same year for pedophilia and human trafficking. Putawar also accepted that he supplied boys to Coombs, whereas the latter denied it. The police later revealed that Coombs had a history of sexual misconduct and was convicted in the past. This only suggests that Nepal's enforcement agencies are still not efficient in arresting individuals with a dark past. Lack of sex offender records also make it easier for pedophiles to target Nepali underage boys. It is high time that the Nepali government launch a sex offender registry and create a mechanism that will flag individuals with criminal backgrounds. Absolutely, I 1000% agree. Also, a 2017 report on Darknet by threatnix.io revealed that pornographic forums in the dark web were also promoting Nepal as a haven for pedophilia. The report also mentions orphanages as a quick way for child exploitation. It further reveals pornographic materials and contents from Nepal were found in the forums, and a user from Nepal too was involved in such a case. Pedophiles will continue to target Nepal unless the nation beefs up its immigration department and enforcement agencies and educates its people. Nepal cannot afford to let its poor citizens become exploited in the hands of those who enter the nation in the name of tourism. Now, they need to stop worshiping the white man. They need to stop seeing the white man as a god. Doesn't matter how many of them come to Mount Everest and spend tens of thousands of dollars to the Sherpas to carry their gear up the mountains like their own personal slaves. Doesn't matter how many times people say Nepal is one of the most beautiful nations in the world, and all of these white magazines that give these descriptions of places that you need to go before you die. They need to protect their children first and foremost, and they need to protect them from the most likely predators, which they themselves describe in this article as middle-aged, upper-income white males. Continuing here. So, pedophiles will continue to target Nepal unless the nation beefs up its immigration department and enforcement agencies and educates its people. Nepal cannot afford to let its poor citizens become exploited in the hands of those who enter the nation in the name of tourism. While the poverty rate has been decreasing in Nepal, there are still children from poor families who are easily lured by pedophiles. This phenomenon needs to stop, and it is only the government that can protect the vulnerable children, or else the narrative that foreigners are to be treated like gods will soon fade away from the Nepali culture, and our children will forever be exposed to pedophilia. Crazy. Absolutely crazy. Shout out to this brother, this Asian brother right here from Nepal. He's a poet, fiction writer, and journalist from Kathmandu. Shout out to him. Once again, Nepal needs to protect its children, and they need to stop letting these people go so leniently. If somebody gets convicted from a crime abroad, they should serve out their sentence. Don't treat them better just because it's a Westerner or a white man in your country, and you don't want to scare away all the other rich Western white tourists. Now, I'm going to give some more platforms, some more light to Asian voices here. This is an article written by Jay Han, published on July 1st, Jan Justin, a white man. So this is a white man here, an Asian man, talking about the hypocrisy of whites stereotyping other groups of people. And meanwhile, the crime that is most often perpetuated by white males goes underreported and not casted upon them as a group of people. So in her now classic paper titled White Fragility, Robin DiAngelo writes about the many ways that white people create a world in their own image. She argues that this world emerges from and reflects a deeply internalized and largely unconscious sense of racial belonging in U.S. society. DiAngelo's point invites us to consider whiteness as a factor, not as a framework. And she and others have pointed out whiteness emerges out of a peculiar history. As such, we can and should identify whiteness where we see it in the world, rather than let it fade into the background. Their contributions may also help us understand how some scholars have responded to one of the most horrific crimes against children, especially Asian children, in recent memory. On June 19th, 2020, the story broke that a powerful white male scholar, Jan Justin, had downloaded over 27,000 pictures and 1,000 videos of child pornography over a period of at least 6 years. Some of these victims were children, originaires de Échange ou des Pays de l'Est, originating in Asia or Eastern countries. My French is horrible, I know. Which is to say, they're marked as non-white Asian children. We don't know the proportion of Asian victims to non-Asians, but no other ethnic or national marker is mentioned. We can conclude, therefore, that he contributed to the production of child pornography and the rape of Asian children. Each word above is a data point. Power, white, male, scholar, child pornography, rape, Asian, children, 6 years. Each of these points is worthy of analysis. Each stands in relation to the others. The scope of the crime can only be understood by taking every point into consideration. With few exceptions, responses to his crimes have glossed over the fact that Jen is a white man, even when every other point is mentioned. This means that while the race of the victim is visible and therefore informs the way we see his his crimes, the race of the criminal is invisible and therefore deemed irrelevant. Whiteness has politely excused itself from analysis. Now, on one hand, there could be articles that are written where they show Jan Justin's face and they, clearly it depicts him as a white man. So it's no mistaking on who he is. But yes, if this was a Muslim man, an Asian man, a black man doing these same sort of crimes, downloading specifically, Asian CP, people would say, why is this black man doing this? They would make a point about that, right? When it's a white man doing it, it's not brought up the same way. And of course, in the articles that are going to be written about Jan Justin or that were written about him when his crime took place, I'm sure there was a lot of sobbing and sad stories written about how Jan Justin's mother died, and he was a depressed child, and so he took out his anger and frustration and sadness on CP. That doesn't make sense. Continuing here. Or not so politely, some are offended by the very mention that he is white. After all, we all know that he is white. Why mention something so obvious? Such a question does not spring from good faith. Its rhetorical purpose is to excuse whiteness. It asks us to frame whiteness as a point of departure, rather than a factor in our analysis. It demands us to say that a male scholar contributed to the rape of Asian children, not a white male scholar. Both are true, but white male scholar offers more space for contextualization and historization than male scholar. It's the superior option because it better represents who he is. I agree. When white people frame the whiteness of the criminal as obvious, then the one who points out that it's not obvious, but a point of analysis, is accused of hating white people. This is a classic case of white fragility. When it's a non-white person drawing attention to the point, they're accused of acting on the basis of their identity. Of course, Jay would write something like this. He's an angry Korean man. And they're correct. I'm writing this as a Korean man. That is my identity, which informs what I do. White people thus recognize that non-white people act on the basis of their identity, but so do white people. They're not special. Therefore, Jan is a white male scholar, and he acted as such in his crimes. Bravo. Bravo. Great way of breaking that down. How a lot of the times, white people say we shouldn't see color, we shouldn't see race. But then, of course, they say that certain groups of people act this way or react this way because of their backgrounds, whether that be a woman, whether that be a man, whether that be a person of a certain racial or ethnic background. Of course, somebody is going to do something that relates to their background, right? Absolutely beautiful how he worded that. So others make the heinousness of his crime into a theological or universal problem. Surely, they say, this is a crime against all people. It represents the complexity of being a human being, or perhaps an instance of evil, as we will see below. This is nonsense. This cannot be a crime against humanity, nor can it demonstrate the grand complexity of humanity, because white men don't get to represent the scope of humanity. They are not special, even when it comes to evil. One person blustered at my remarks. Are you accusing me as a white man of the same crimes as that white man? So here's the person that wrote a very long, stupid comment here. Let's read this stupid comment. Let's read the stupid comment. This is very similar to the comments that I get from white supremacists who jump in my comment section. So this just gives y'all a taste of what I read every day. Race may well be a data point, but sometimes we could be looking in the wrong places for data. You may or may not be right about Juster, but I attribute Jan Juster's actions to evil. As I said, I don't know him, nor do I care to, so I can't read his mind. Was he trading in Asian porn because he specifically had fantasies about Asian children? Was he a racist? I don't know. Was he trading in Asian porn because it was most readily available? I don't know that either. Either way, I want to see this man removed from society for as long as possible. And in my honest opinion, he won't be put away for long enough. Do you really want to lump racial groups together to suit your intersectional narrative? In our racially divided country, we are understandably hearing a great deal about African Americans who have been targeted by some white people. Never mind that there is far more black on white crime than there is white on black crime. And it goes without saying that blacks are much more commonly victimized by other blacks. But it would be unwise and prejudiced of me to consider all blacks as violent felons, God forbid, because of the actions of some African Americans. Are you suggesting that we need to indict whites because of one evil pervert victimized Asian children by trading in such illegal and unethical smut? I certainly hope not. Are you indicting me for being white because of what Houston did? Are you indicting Shaw, Allen, Lawrence, or others because of the color of our skin? We had no more control over the color of our skin than you did. If you do, then you have your own serious prejudices and demons to deal with. I'm so sick. I'm so sick of white fragility. God, this is such a stupid comment. Such a stupid comment. It's worth breaking down, but also not even worth giving attention to, because I'm sure the writer is going to break it down as well. But that's just a taste. That's just a taste of my comment section. And nothing makes me happier than getting a long Bible page worth of a comment from a white supremacist angry that I spoke about my experiences with racism and why white supremacy and anti-blackness is wrong, and just deleting it. I love it. That's the best part of my day. Continuing here. Of course, no one should be held responsible for someone else's crimes. However, if another powerful white male commits the same crimes as that white man, then as a scholar, I'm bound to take his whiteness into account, because now we've established a pattern that approximates real events in the world. We can now contextualize this pattern into what Stephen Young has recently called another entry in the long history of white men participating in the violent subjugation of non-white people. After all, if we're trying to stop evil in our community, we must see how it actually manifests, through which channels, among whom, against whom. We must interrogate what happened, why, how, when, where, and most importantly, who. To discard race from our analysis would make us poor scholars. Note what this does not assume. This does not assume that interiority is important. I do not know what Jan was thinking, nor can any of us know. His personal fantasies are immaterial. His deliberations no longer exist in the world as data. Therefore, we must reject Jan's claims to have a secret garden in contradiction with him, with myself. As scholars, we're under no obligation to take him at his word. In fact, we cannot, for the simple reason that his interiority contains no data for study. Thoughts, motives, and feelings of self-contradiction are not available to scholars as objects of analysis, only words, actions, and events. I see no evidence of a self-contradiction because there can be none. By extension, if scholars fail to discard the myth promulgated by Jan himself of an internal contradiction, they cease to be scholars and claim to be seers. The more responsible option, then, is to see his appeal to interiority for what it is, obfuscating rhetoric in the service of public rehabilitation. Or we can take another step back and ask, who is allowed to have self contradictions? Who gives and possesses the privilege to have a redeemable private self and an unimpeachable public self? Who gets to be quote unquote individual and who must always represent something beyond themselves? Most importantly, who accepts the stupendous myth that brilliant white men have complex interiorities, thereby opening a subterranean channel for rehabilitation? As one tweet put it poignantly, it's not like anybody else gets to separate their scholarship from what we've been trained to do: appeal to observable facts and documentable patterns. What we have are his words, his actions, and his identity as a powerful white man. We can then contextualize to see whether there is a pattern of other powerful white men brutalizing powerless bodies, both whites and non-whites. And there is. We can then historicize this phenomenon to see what factors allowed such people to commit these crimes in these ways, at this moment, in that place, against those people. By doing so, we can work to create a community that does not facilitate, welcome, or rehabilitate such disgusting people. I wear sunglasses and a PBS shirt when I go for my occasional walk outside. I like to imagine that they will protect me in this particularly virulent period of anti-Asian racism. Kung flu, China virus. My race is always on me, so must Jan's be on him. Beautiful. Beautiful work right here. I love how he broke all of this down. I know a lot of people might jump into the comment section and say, not all white people commit sexual violence against children. Not all white people are pedophiles. Well, while the vast majority of pedophiles are white men, that doesn't indicate each and every one of us. Listen, we have to look at patterns here. We have to look at patterns. And I can readily admit that a lot of black men are in gangs and sell drugs and do, horrific violent crimes. Unfortunately, this is a problem in the black community in America. And a lot of that has to do with the systemic biases that are against us, the lack of socioeconomic opportunity or mobility within society. And there's ways to explain the crime that exist in the black community, or in the Hispanic community, or in the Asian community, whatever you want to say. There's reasons to explain it. The same thing must be said about the pedophilia that seems to be rampant amongst white men in many different countries in their community. We have to discover what is the pattern, what is the reason, and why. And so far, my hypothesis has a lot to do with their waning influence of white supremacy, their ancestors bleeding through their genes, making them feel like they can continue to harass and abuse children, young boys and girls of different ethnicities and countries, and that their whiteness gives them protection from actually having to be persecuted for their crimes. Epstein is one example of proof, right? So let's continue here. So let's ask this even more blatantly. More blatantly, for the people in the back, are sex offenders white? This was written by Judith Levine and Erica Miners, published on April 11, 2016 for Counterpunch. So there's a striking difference between the sex offenders featured in most journalism, activist campaigns, and popular media, and the guy who's usually the focus of criminal justice attention. The latter is usually a person of color. The sex offender is portrayed as white. But is the sex offender really white? Yes, 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 yes. Big, bold letters. Y-E, yes. Y-E-S. So, but is the sex offender really white? Yes. This group is more racially proportionate to the general population than, say, drug offenders. But like every other criminal population, people convicted and punished for sex crimes are disproportionately African American. 6 in 10 people in prison are non-white, but 2/3 of convicted sex offenders are white. In other words, sex offenders comprise the only criminal population in which white people are represented roughly in proportion to their numbers in the general population. Among those who are publicly listed on the registries, more than 2/3 are also whites, according to an ongoing analysis by Alyssa Ackerman and colleagues of over 454,000 publicly registered sex offenders in all 50 states, the federal government, and the U.S. protectorates. Still, the analysis found black people are disproportionately represented on the registries. African Americans account for 22% of publicly listed registered sex offenders nationally. They make up just 13% of the U.S. population. Limited data are available on race and juvenile sex offenders. Juvenile sex offenders are also called JSOs. But preliminary research published in 2015 by Rebecca L. Fix and colleagues in Sex Abuse, a journal of research and treatment, suggests a similar pattern. Looking at a sample of juvenile offenders in Alabama, the study found that while the state's juvenile population is 32% African American, 41% of juvenile sex offenders and 67% of non-juvenile sex offenders were African American. African American youth were overrepresented among confined JSOs and non-JSOs, the authors write. Yet African Americans were significantly less overrepresented among JSOs compared with non-JSOs. The same is true for adult criminal populations. Adding to the skewed numbers, like other arrestees, defendants, and inmates, people convicted of sex offenses move through criminal justice systems structured by racial bias. Prosecutors are more likely to charge a man of color with rape, and juries are more likely to convict. Racialized assumptions are also built into sex crimes policy and forensic practices, from the statute defining an offense's seriousness and therefore the severity of its penalty, to the instruments used to assess a person's risk of reoffending. For instance, assessment tools such as the Static 99 give higher risk points to the sexual assault of a stranger, a crime for which African Americans are convicted more than whites. Then they do incest, which is more likely to be reported by white families. Risk points are also added to prior convictions, whether for sexual or non-sexual crimes. Another disadvantage to people of color disproportionately arrested, charged, and convicted. Sex offenders may be quote unquote whiter, but it is likely that non-white sex offenders receive more significant charges and face more prison time and more rigid terms of parole and probation than white sex offenders. Now, that goes to show that the criminal justice system in America is racist. It's unfair, right? The vast majority of people that commit these sort of crimes are reported to be white males, but black men, when they are reported, are more likely to be punished than the white men who do the same similar crime. We see the same thing happen with drugs. We see the same thing happen with gun violence and that sort of stuff. So it's not a surprise to me to hear that black men, when accused of sex crimes, get tried and convicted more than the same white men that do the same crime. And I know there are some people, because this is Simon Hill Keeps It Real, that put out the argument that, well, black men do the same sort of crimes, but they do them more violently. That's not true. That's not true. That's explicitly not true. There's this continued myth among the white supremacist circles that the disparity between white sentencing and black sentencing is that black men are more violent in their crimes and therefore they will receive harsher penalties. That's not true. When the when the same conditions are held, when we look at similar crimes committed by similar people, violent crimes and nonviolent crimes, white people still, by and large, get lesser sentences than black men. Continuing here. So we've been reading about how white men across the world, whether they be in the Catholic Church, whether they be flying to Nepal or Thailand, by and large, they get a slap on the wrist and a pat on the back when they abuse children. But yet and still, what do we see in America? Racial disparities when it comes to these sorts of crimes. Going to be reading here. Study: 1% of black men in the U.S. are registered sex offenders. Research contends that sex offender registries reflect widespread systemic bias. Albany, New York, May 19th, 2016. 1% of all black men in the U.S. are registered sex offenders, and black men enter the sex offender registry at nearly twice the rate of white men, a new University at Albany study finds. Researchers say these findings reveal how the uneven impact of America's criminal justice system extends to sex crime policy, an area largely overlooked in the scientific literature. Our study reveals that a war on sex offenders appears to be gaining steam, just as the war on drugs has lost its cultural legitimacy. The number of sex offenders is on the rise and is disproportionately from the same group that is targeted by criminal justice authorities, black men. Albany Assistant Professor of Sociology and Study author Trevor Hopp said. In the study, publishing sex offenders, and the missing punitive turn in sexuality studies, researchers used public data sets to examine sex offender rates between 2005 and 2013 and analyzed databases of currently registered offenders to evaluate registration by race. The analysis surveyed 49 states. Maine and Washington, D.C., which do not publish race data, were not included. An initial finding revealed the need for the study itself, despite the fact that more than 750,000 Americans are currently registered as sex offenders. Very little social science research has examined how registration policies are enforced and which communities are impacted by them. Exploring the data, rates of sex offender registration increased more than 24% in the U.S. between 2005 and 2013. Yet that jump does not reflect broader trends in correctional supervision rates, including those in jail and prison, as well as those on parole and probation, declined more than 10% during the same time period. However, state and federal policies enacted in the 1990s and 2000s vastly expanded the scope of sex offender registries. The study's findings suggest that these policy shifts cause rates of sex offender registration to continue to grow even as rates in correctional supervision declined. Embedded in those increased registration rates, researchers find that in every state but Michigan, a higher sex offender registration rate was found for blacks than for whites. In 9 states, black Americans were registered as sex offenders at 3 times the rate of whites, including Connecticut, Florida, Iowa, Massachusetts, New Jersey, Oregon, Rhode Island, Washington, and Wisconsin. In Florida, South Dakota, Texas, and Utah, more than 2% of black men were publicly registered sex offenders. Nationwide, the sex offender registration rate for black Americans, 501 sex offenders per 100,000 adults, was more than twice that of whites, 238 sex offenders per 100,000 adults. In addition, roughly 1 out of every 119 black men living in the 49 states analyzed were registered sex offenders, encompassing nearly 1% of all black men. Concluded Hopp, sex offenses are the only kind of crime that requires public registration. People convicted of murder are not required to share that information with their neighbors and community members after they serve their time. The idea behind these policies is that sex offenders are more likely to commit the same crime again, and thus we ought to supervise them more closely. But countless studies have shown this to be false. These findings reveal that this irrational panic around sex is having troubling effects that ought to be considered by policymakers. So once again, we're seeing the unfairness in the criminal justice system and the continued demonization of black men's sexuality. 1% of black men as sex offenders. This was published in 2016. It might be more by now. The number might have slightly increased or jumped up precipitously. I'm not sure. I did not double check. But still, that is a staggering number. And knowing America, seeing a pattern in American history, I would not be surprised if that trend continued. Now, we know that the majority of sex offenders are white, and this needs to be talked about. Like I said in this live stream, I wanted to do this civilly. I wanted to do this with a clean mouth, a clean heart, and going in this willing to learn, but also begging the question to my audience, to challenge my audience as well, to fight back against the narratives that are put against black men all the time. They love to typecast us and stereotype us. Well, there's a lot of typecasting and stereotyping that could be said about this group of people that seem to not have to carry the burden of this sort of evil crime on their jacket, right? So Ozzy said the constant fascination with our phallus. Absolutely. Once again, I think that relates to how, the war on drugs is falling apart. Many of the states are now legalizing marijuana, and maybe in the future we'll see more hard drugs or former narcotics or governmentally listed narcotics legal in America, right? That's falling by the wayside. So they can't lock up black men for drug trafficking or drug using. So now they are resorting to the good old fashioned trick of demonizing our sexuality. Now, if there are black men who are out there like R. Kelly, who are abusing young girls, yeah, y'all should be in jail too. Once again, I'm not saying that only white men are the abusers, but the vast majority of abusers of children are white men, and they are traveling around the world, going to Thailand, Nepal, and other countries, Kenya as well. I talked about this on a previous live stream. They're going to Kenya and abusing children, going to Thailand, going to Cambodia, and other places, and also abusing them in their own countries as well. It needs to be talked about. I want to say shout out to my guy Ozzy for jumping into the chat. Shout out to everybody that's going to watch this on the playback. Y'all continue to support this black independent channel on YouTube, where I'm being constantly attacked and harassed by the white supremacists because I call out their sick, vile, wicked culture, and I'm trying to advocate for a better society for all people. Y'all stay tuned for more content on my channel. Live with Acti coming up next. Y'all be easy out there.